Welcome to Crypto Sapiens, a show that hosts lively discussions with innovative Web3 builders to help you learn about decentralized money systems, including Ethereum, Bitcoin, and DeFi. The podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and it is not financial advice. Crypto Sapiens is presented in partnership with Bankless DAO, a movement for pioneers seeking freedom from the limitations of the traditional financial system. Bankless DAO will help the world go bankless by creating user-friendly on-ramps for people to discover decentralized financial technologies through education, media, and culture. Hello, everyone. We are back with another episode of Crypto Sapiens. And today we are talking with Supriyo, founder and CEO of Hyype, to learn about the NFT social network that enables collectors and curators to connect stories to NFTs in their collections. And we discuss providing a space tailored to the uniqueness of NFT communities and creating the culture, history, and lore of the NFT universe. Let's get started.
My name is Supriyo. I am the founder and CEO for Hyype, which is a social storytelling platform for NFTs. I have been in tech for the last 12 years. And before Hyype, I was leading the product and design team at Smart Home for Alexa. And before that, built the product design team at Klaviyo in Boston. Before that, led the product design team at Flipkart. So I had been in similar sort of roles in the traditional Web 2 world. And while I was doing that, I also come from a software engineering background and have been mostly sort of tinkering through Web3 things for the last couple of years, albeit more passively, I would say like since 2017. And my first exposure to NFTs were through CryptoKitties back in 2019. And that's how I started getting embedded into the community and sort of kept ramping up on the side of my contributions and just learning.
Wow, that's great. For me, I'm always fascinated by stories of people who have jobs, not just in traditional Web2 space, but like in these leading FAANG companies, right? So Amazon being an example, I guess, of that type of business. How do you feel that Web2 either inspired your transition and also kind of fed into how you approach development in the Web3 space?
Right. I think a lot of times Web2 has been looking into, building services or building platforms or products which onboard the next billion people onto the internet, right? That's how Web2 products and platforms have approached things, right? Coming from a developing nation, like I grew up in India and then moved away. I think personally, there are still a lot of people who don't know how to use basic internet services. And, it's just about varying degree of digital literacy. And I think approaching with that mindset of how we can, really open up the gates to like internet revolution for people had been something which Web2 companies generally inspire to some degree, right? And I think the same philosophy applies on Web3, where we are now, a few more steps ahead, where we are thinking that, hey, okay, Web3 is, built by developers for developers. It's a pretty niche space still. How do we really cross the chasm and bring in the rest of the traditional Web2 crowd, right? So we are even further out in terms of adoption, and I think some of that thought process is really necessary, where we are not trying to build super niche small little products here and there which just don't scale out after some time, right? The only way adoption for Web3 really happens is when you approach it from a billion people scale mindset. And that's when, you are really looking at a big wide spectrum of people with varying degree of digital literacy and seeing that, are the things we are building really easy enough for everybody to understand, or is it, like still super complex for an average internet user?
Yeah, for me, and not to get too far away, because I think these are all wonderful talking points, so I do want to address them. But for me, one of the interesting things or questions is, how is Web 2 kind of owning that onboarding experience for the next billion users, right? To bring them onto the internet. And, where are the difficulties or the challenges really that they can't scale, or that they can't really take that next step so clearly as maybe Web 3? Like, is Web 3 able to do that more easily because of because of how it works? And what are the challenges then, conversely, in how it's creating those onboarding experiences?
Right, right. I think fundamentally here, because Web3 is a lot more participative, in theory, you are looking at products which are truly built for inclusion. A lot of times, Web 2 essentially is clouded by human bias, right? You are looking at people building products for someone in, like a developing country, and they're building it from their mindset of sitting here in US, and the user psyche is very different. The circumstances of where people live in and how they would use products are very different. And I think that's where having things really decentralized and not like being restricted by boundaries is something which I really love about Web3. Web3 was built on top of a remote culture, right? It was built on top of abolishing boundaries in that sense. So I think that way Web3 is a natural progression in terms of building inclusive experiences. And I think, like that, if done right, it will really open up all of those artificial boundaries we like to put in otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And actually, so there's so much more I want to explore there. But before we do, I do want to make sure we talk about Hyype, right? Because I know that these meta discussions, right, these really high level philosophical conversations are very interesting, and definitely a big part of this show, what we do here. But we do want to talk about that transition from your Web 2 job to Web 3, and how that became Hyype. Like, how did you get from all of what you were doing before to dabbling in Web 3, discovering CryptoKitties early, and then saying, you know what, we need to create some sort of like social layer for NFTs, and then having that become Hyype?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So taking a step back, I think, when I first got introduced to CryptoKitties, I really liked the idea of like actually owning something for what I was doing it anyway. Like, I had been playing games like since ages, and like with CryptoKitties, even though the experience at that time was very rudimentary based on like what the Ethereum chain at that time provided, right? But the fact that I could sort of independently owned what came out of my decision making during in terms of breeding or buying and things like that, that was really fascinating to me. And I think as a collector, that sort of really extended at that time, I thought could be applied to, like other sorts of artifacts, not just in-game items, but, like just regular art or maybe music assets or real estate or whatnot, right? Any kind of artifact which people own today. So I think fast forward, NFTs were still sort of, like a very few handful of people, even till 2020, I think, in the mid, when it was just a few people who were still exploring the ecosystem. In 2021, when everything sort of just catapulted into popularity, what I realized was majority of the NFT ecosystem still had been sort of over-indexed about the user journey of buying and selling, right? That was what was making news. Like, hey, CryptoPunks was being sold for so much money, and this Bored Apes is being sold for so much money, and everything was about value accrual. But something which was kind of overlooked was that what makes an NFT community, or say an ape or a cat or a punk today, right? And what that means is that punks are punks today because of the community and the context and the history and all the artifacts which have been created around it, which really creates iconic moments through those points in time, which eventually make them a living brand, right? So when we are looking at NFTs themselves, they are also a slow evolution of a brand itself, and that's what Hyype is about. Hyype allows allows a platform or an opportunity for people who own NFTs to build out their own sort of brand around the NFT itself. So today, if you talk about when you are looking at your DAO punk or when you are looking at your ape, right? What is it that makes your ape special? What is it that makes it stand out among other 10,000 apes, right? And that's what you would want to express as an identity artifact using Hyype. And when you do that, what we do through the platform is we attach it permanently to your NFT. So unlike you sending out a tweet about it and then it disappearing after a few months, or you posting it on Discord and then that disappearing in a message thread, it just gets permanently attached to the NFT itself, and then it lives there forever. And as you grow that NFT brand, your lore is so much more rich and diverse that it is bound to command a higher premium over the ones which are not lored. So that's generally the broad thesis of how Hyype came to be and what we intend to build around it.
Yeah, so walk me through social experience of NFTs, because I think you touched on a few interesting things here, and many that I personally agree with. I mean, I think a lot of the value of NFTs really comes from their communities, the people that either identify with the individual NFT that they purchased or with just the general community, right? The vibe, the mission, what they're trying to do in this space, right? So I think that there's definitely a lot of truth in like creating platforms, or a lot of value, I should say, in creating platforms that are representative of those truths, right? Of that mission, of that brand, of that identity, of those NFTs, and of your own personal collection. So walk me through maybe how Hyype differentiates itself, maybe without having to name some of the other platforms that are being developed in the social NFT space from those that are being created.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that the way Hyype differentiates itself is it's a platform where doesn't matter you have one NFT or 10,000 NFTs, you still have the same degree of importance or uniqueness among others. And what that means is that to contribute on Hyype, you don't need to keep buying NFTs, right? Even if you have one, you could still, build out a pretty creative experience around it. And the way it ties back to, like social experiences or movements today is, but an example, right? Like CC0, right? People have been talking about it recently, and CC0 is more sort of an ideology in terms of how art is collected, what you do with IP rights and things like that. And Cryptors, for example, is a manifestation of that idea, right? And a community sort of rallying around it. And what Hyype really does is gives those ideas a common form beyond a Discord server for other people to look at. And when you do that, it sort of gets associated always with that common manifestation, which is a Toad NFT. And people are able to, like rally around it, interact around it, sort of talk around it. And that eventually sort of all comes down to how active or how creative you are around the NFT itself. You could talk about it, once a year, or you could talk about it every day. And Hyype allows both sort of sides of the spectrum in that sense.
Well, that's interesting. So for anyone who's listening and doesn't know what CC0 is, CC0 is just the Creative Commons license, which basically is no rights reserved, right? So I believe that means that anyone could use either the art form, its story in its complete sense, commercialize it, etc. With that having been clarified, I find it truly interesting what you've just said in terms of, both the discussions happening around CC0, but also in terms of lores. While perhaps there isn't a way to have full ownership in every project, right? Because some do reserve rights for the NFTs that you purchase. Some, do not give you any rights at all, but others do. Regardless of that, there is an opportunity for someone to add value to the NFT that they own through storytelling. I think that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, so I think just to touch on that, I think when we say storytelling, it's also about really building out an expansive universe around the NFT itself. Like you could look at an NFT as just being a pixelated image of a person, right? But you can let your imagination run wild that, okay, what is this person up to? What are their likes and dislikes? What do they stand for? And things like that. And that's how you really build out a better presence for them, especially in an increasingly digital world where, those digital personas are slowly, building out and sort of blending in with the real people out there. You can look at Twitter accounts today, and there are so many of them which are just NFTs. You don't know the person behind them, but you know what they are up to, what they talk about, and what they stand for.
Yeah, for me, and obviously not just for me, this is just generally truth. Storytelling has been the way that we've kept a historical record going back to, before we could write, right? So I find it just super interesting that we're bringing this very, I guess for lack of a better word, native, primitive way of informing our NFTs, which are incredibly complex digital, beings in terms of they're programmatic. They exist on a blockchain. All of these things that to many people doesn't really make sense. But we really bring it back to something that is, recognizable by many of us, which is look at the story, read the story. There's value here beyond just the technology. And, like you were saying, in an increasingly digital world, that's refreshing. So I do want to touch on something that you talked about early, which I think Hyype is doing really good at, and that's user experience, right? And so when we were first talking about your experience in the traditional Web2 space and that transition into the Web3 space, one of the things that I feel needs a lot of attention is user experience and user interfaces, right? I think Web2, because of the amount of experience that they have and number of people that they have building in it and the funds to support development over time and iterate, et cetera, they really, for the most part, have done a really good job at creating good experiences for a user to, manage, whether it's their bank account or whatever, but they can use these applications in a friendly way. Whereas in Web3, usually that's not the case. It's really complicated. So where did that sit in terms of the development of Hyype? And how do you think that can improve just overall in the Web3 space?
Yeah, I think for us, I when we were building the platform, I would like to say we attempt building Hyype as three equal important pillars. We look at product, we look at design, as well as we look at tech. So all three are equally important, right? It's like a stool. If you have one of the legs smaller than the other, the stool is going to stay. So I think what's really important with Hyype right now is we, instead of us just shipping fast and building a band-aid experience, what we want to do is we want to take a holistic look at whether it's something which people understand. Is it working well for them? Do they like it or not? And when I say really people, it's about harnessing how Web3 development is approached differently, right? At the moment, instead of us being on a Slack channel, closed away from the community who is using it, we made it a point that the entire team just sits on Discord, and like they are able to interact with everybody on the community, and they're able to look into feedback, and we are actively using that to make sure that our workflows make sense. And what we also want to do is we want to make sure that when we are designing something, when it comes to user interfaces, it's extremely convenient within the bounds of what constraints we have to work with when it comes to Web3, right? So if you take those constraints away, how can we make all the user flows as simple as possible, as delightful as possible, so that when you are using it, it doesn't feel like a job, it doesn't feel like a chore, it's something where you would want to spend time on. So that's generally like our product philosophy of how we would want to build it and how we are continuing to build. I think on Web3, my biggest sort of pet peeve with Web3 experiences is that it's still really far from being convenient and easy to use. So like simple examples like MetaMask, right, which your primary gateway to Web3 world, like making a transaction through MetaMask or making something as simple as swap, right? It's like really, really hard. And understanding gas and explaining it to somebody without you, really getting into the nitty-gritties of how it really works, it's hard. Like it's not as simple as just, picking up your phone and Venmoing something to someone. So I think we are far away from that level of convenience, but I think things are getting a lot better, interfaces are getting a lot better, and we are getting into a spot where we are really considering good, delightful experiences beyond desktop. I think that's really important. Like most people on the planet today do not own like a really good laptop, right? And it cannot be only desktop experiences. We have to be, like really cognizant about building equally good first-class citizen experiences on mobile and other sort of devices.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And to your point in terms of MetaMask, I mean, even managing your gas, like, which is kind of crucial to anything you do on the blockchain, is so difficult. Like, honestly, yes, I appreciate the many different ways that I can adjust my gas, but a lot of times I think that just enables people to make mistakes. I know I personally have in the past where I ended up paying $700 for gas for something and didn't get anything because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So, so I think that is just something that needs tremendous improvement as we are building technology that is meant to be accessible, to be facilitating the onboarding of everyone, 1 billion people, many to your point, who don't have the technology that they need to support it. And if they did, don't have the experience or maybe even the access to the information to learn how to use that.
Right. And I think it also goes back to, bringing in some of those points of convenience from Web 2 to the Web 3 world. I know that it's another meta discussion of, how centralized or decentralized certain things need to be, right? So for instance, when you look at MetaMask, it's truly user custodial, right? So if you make a user error, too bad, like you are on your own. But that's why things are so complicated. And if you compare it to, something which is a little bit more centralized, like Coinbase, they are in that position of making it easier and more convenient for user because they are taking some of those complexity away in exchange of custody, right? So that's something which I think is an important discussion. Like as a whole, the community needs to have that. What is that fine line? Where do you want to draw the line where bringing in mainstream convenience is important enough that there are some trade-offs you would be willing to make, and what are the degrees of trade-offs you would be wanting to make?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think so. I think you're doing a fantastic job right now at directing us to the next point that maybe we should be talking about. But before I do, I'm gonna keep pulling on that thread in terms of centralization versus decentralization. I think definitely, as we fall deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole, after discovering our first token or our first NFT, I think that there is definitely many of us who will continue to seek out that decentralization, right? That self-sovereignty, that ownership in this space. But when we're getting started, should we be expecting that of everyone? And personally, to me, the answer is absolutely not, because there are many different things that someone needs to learn where if they are not mindful of or careful of learning them in the right way, they can end up getting wrecked, having assets stolen. So it's important for us to recognize the value also of these custodians, if you will, like which is the reason why I think exchanges are popular, especially for someone just getting started. And so with that, we can talk about some of the integrations that Hyype has recently done in order to facilitate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, what we really wanted to build out, even right from the onset of our MVP, was that we would want to make things which are conforming to the best of both worlds in terms of Web 2 as well as Web 3. Now, when it comes to that, we had to make a choice that, hey, do we want to keep going for just hex addresses and just use that as people's identity, or introduce a concept of username which people are used to? And we decided to go for having usernames, because end of the day, a high profile at its core is just your own curational layer of the assets you own in your wallet, and that's what makes your profile unique. And as long as you have full custody of that, there is no reason why you wouldn't want another sort of user-friendly abstraction on top of that, having your username, having your brand, how you are used to on the world of Twitter or Discord and things like that. That was one of the things. Another thing was that when it comes to stories or lore itself, there was a question of, whether we want to be fully on chain right now, or do we want to make that choice of getting there progressively and looking at the on chain sort of storage infrastructure and the kind of flexibility we wanted to give people, and where the network is today, right? When it costs so many dollars to do basic things on the network. And we realized that, when it comes to telling stories, we don't want you to pay $20-$30 every time you want to write a story about your NFT. And that's why we went for a hybrid approach where at Hyype, when you go and write a lore or write a backstory about your NFT, we commit it on IPFS, but we also keep a local cache copy so that we have multiple points of redundancy. And that way, your lore is committed on IPFS. It's not something which is stored on Hyype servers or something like that. But we do keep a local cache so that the app itself is performant, and that goes back to the point of convenience. And eventually what we would want to do is, when the on-chain storage infrastructure is diverse enough and cost efficient enough, we would want to be fully on-chain and eventually, move the associations of NFTs as well as the lore to on-chain. And then, we'll be completely redundant as a middle layer in the middle there. But until that point, I think we as a platform could be pretty open in terms of accessibility to the lore, in terms of how people would want to build on top of that content, as well as, making sure that it's something which is useful enough for an average user without costing money.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, okay, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of the product. So how do projects get listed, if you will, or communities get access to Hyype? And then how do communities then build out those lores? So maybe we'll start with the first.
Yeah, sure. So right now, I think it's a temporary state. So we launched early in November, so we are still pretty new. And if you compare it to overall Ethereum, there are about 32.7 million tokens and counting on Ethereum, like NFTs alone. And that accounts for almost 23,000 collections. So out of those, we support about 40 collections today. And that's a really small number when it comes to who has access to Hyype yet. But we are planning to open up to entirety of Ethereum mainnet by January. So it's pretty close. And what that would mean is anyone who has an Ethereum NFT at that point will be able to sign up on Hyype and use it. Up until that point, I think right now the communities who are part of Hyype are, like early adopters or the users, and any community who wants to come and integrate with Hyype, like they're happy to just reach out to us. And the integration just takes about a day or two, mostly because when we integrate, we make sure that we have all the information indexed so that the community members, when they sign up, all of their sort of information related to metadata, which is still sort of centralized for the most part, coming in from project servers or community servers or IPFS, it's all on there already on Hyype. And then, that's it. That's when the integration goes live, and all you need to do is just connect your wallet, sign to show that you are the owner of the wallet, and you're good to go.
And so how do communities participate in that process? Because I remember, like I mentioned earlier, when I first discovered the product was when DAOpunks, there was a community engagement point for us to vote them in. How does that work? How do communities get involved in that once the projects have come to you?
Yeah, well, once they come to us, I think so far we had been introducing access to communities as individual cohorts of 10 to 12 communities at a time. And DAOpunks was part of the second cohort. So when the onboarding actually happens, like all you need to do is just go in and start building out lore for yourself. And essentially, it comes down to individual communities. So, like Hyype is a blank canvas. So if it's about building out a fictional universe for your characters, you could go and do it on Hyype and use that as a thematic for the rest of your community to make sure, like the community is coming together to build around a common theme. And then there could be projects who would just want to, keep it as an archive of collector statements. So something which comes to mind is Curio cards, for example, right? Curio cards, there are about like 34 cards. It's a historic project that it existed technically before CryptoKitties. And the way they had been using Hyype is there are 32 cards, and not everybody knows why a certain card is preferred over others. So what the card collectors had been doing, they had been going on Hyype and talk about why they purchased their first card, how was it important to them, what made them pick a card over other card. And that way, every card sort of becomes like this evolving Wikipedia of sorts on Hyype. And that has been really interesting to see. And compare that to, say, a project like Avastars or DAOpunks, we had been seeing really expansive sort of fictional backstories being written for every character. And that brings the character to life. They are not, just a great artwork piece anymore. They are actually actual personalities, which people are, conjuring up using their imagination.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that that's really interesting because there's a lot of value, I guess, just in the individuals being able to own their assets beyond just having them in a wallet, but owning their assets in terms of their IP, right, and creating content for that. And I like that the identity goes beyond just an image, and the identity really goes deeply into a story. That then can transcend maybe even some of what the creators of these projects had intended. And you create more valuable experiences over time. I think, one of the things in branding is you want to have something that's truly sticky, that people keep coming back for. And I think if you can have communities building out stories that way, creating that stickiness to your product, to your project, I think, that's just a fantastic tool for both communities and individuals long term.
Yep. And that really gives communities way more diverse tools to, really build relationship with the NFTs they own, and like really explore that frontier instead of just waiting for floor to go up, right? You've got to work to make that happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, I personally, I don't mind the floor going up, but anything that I've personally bought into, honestly, is because of the art first and because of the community second and everything else last. I mean, the art to me, if it's original, if it's interesting, if it's colorful in the case of certain NFTs, I really appreciate that, especially because personally I'm not a very colorful character. Black and white are the colors I wear all the time. Gray would be like a bright color for me. Uh, but in Web3, I definitely appreciate the colorfulness. So yeah, certainly those are some of the things I look for.
I agree, and like to that point, just wanted to clarify as well, right? That absolutely, like folks who are buying in for the vibes of the community, what the artist stands for or the community stands for, that's a great start. But like a lot of times, I personally have seen communities like really building up expectations, which can pull the artist down with this overbearingness that can artists do something, right? Like, and it's not on the artist to always keep giving beyond what they have given already. And it also becomes like this bi-directional relationship where the community is now having ownership of an asset, is basically contributing to that process of the creative process of evolving it further beyond what was there in the first start. And I think that's where something like Hyype really comes in. And I keep talking about Hyype in that sense. But yeah, I think it's a position where you could go in and not only just talk about it like as text, but also really use it as a repository for being creative and imaginative about just about anything. So, for example, I personally, go and commission artwork from artists I really admire and their art style I admire for the NFTs I own. And then, I go in and post about it on Hyype, knowing that those artworks, because they are now tagged attached to these NFTs, are going to always be that rich sort of encyclopedia, if you will, for every NFT I own. And those artworks are going to be committed in one place. They are not just going to be laying in my hardware somewhere, waiting to be forgotten.
Man, that's incredible. So now you're talking about Hyype also as a tool for incentivizing commissioned art. I mean, that's a powerful statement. Well, so let's talk about, I guess, beyond where Hyype is today. Where is Hyype going into the future? What can we expect, in terms of development, both creative and technical development into the future from Hyype?
So I think, like it goes without saying that, we know that the future is multi-chain. So we absolutely want to bring that aspect in soon enough. And once we are available for the entirety of Ethereum mainnet, we will want to expand into other L2s. We will want to, build out through, Optimism, Polygon, Immutable, and whatnot, like every other place where you have NFTs, we would want to bring those communities in, because the same principle applies regardless of the technology the NFTs are on. And another thing which we would want to really build out on is storytelling is going to be the core part of our platform almost always. But what we would want to do is we would want to keep building out our infrastructure as well for others to build on top of it. So if you have seen it, we already have APIs available for people to just come in and use it for free to like really build out experiences on top of the content which people have been committing through Hyype to, showcase on their website or, on their AR, VR experience or wherever they would want. And eventually what we want to do is we would want Hyype to be a sort of one-stop shop for everything related to a community. So right now it's about storytelling. We would want to, build out automated feeds like what your community is buying and selling at the moment, right? Which NFT is the most load? Who are the most active writers in your community and things like that. And all of that information is going to be available in one place. So you are not only going to be seeing just one facet of the NFT, you are going to be seeing, multiple sort of bird eye view analysis of what the community is up to when it comes to content.
And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about Hyype, please go to Hyype, that's HYY.PE, and on Twitter at HyypeHQ, HYYPEHQ. Thanks for listening to Crypto Sapiens. Please give us a follow, like, and a 5-star review wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And stay tuned for our next discussion.